Hi, I'm Rob Vanstone. Welcome to the 43rd edition of the Rider Rumblings video podcast. Notice how adeptly I managed to keep count of the number of editions we've had so far. It was so difficult until I started attaching a player's uniform number to it and committing that to memory. So last week it was number 42 in honor of Eddie Lowe. This week, number 43, Ted Ernest. We lost Ted sadly late in 2018, 81 years old, as Hall of Famer, just a wonderful, wonderful man. So number 43, Ted Ernest, we're honoring him today. And we're very honored to have with us 2007 Grey Cup champion, defensive tackle with the Saskatchewan-roughriders, Tony Plater, formerly in communications, formerly in football operations with the Rough-Riders, and always one of the terrific people to deal with anywhere you run into him in the city or in Saskatchewan. So Tony, thanks so much for taking some time.
It's a pleasure to be here, Rob. I've watched 42 of these, and they were very good.
Oh.
And I think from 44 on, they'll be even better.
We've really sold this one, haven't we?
Yes.
We decided we're going to do a couple of theme shows back to back. This week's theme, and we advertised it a bit last week, is on favorite rider memories, which is probably a documentary as much as it is a podcast. And then next week, we're going to talk about favorite rider players. So this week, we're going to delve into the past. And Tony was so integrally involved with some of the really cool things we're going to talk about. So it's great that he's with us today to provide some firsthand recollections of some of the subject matter that we're going to be addressing. Last week, we put out a call for some rider memories that fans wanted to share. We got a couple of responses. Drew Hunter sent me a note. Drew Hunter, the former U of R Cougars basketball player, former Luther Lions senior boys basketball coach, member of the legendary Regina Hunter family, not the Hunter brothers that sing. He told me a story about how they made a replica Grey Cup that weighed about 40 pounds, and they decided to really show it off the first home game after the 2013 Grey Cup, and so here they are going down the underpass near the stadium, and it rained a lot and they got flooded. So here they are at the bottom of the underpass, unable to get out with this 40-pound Grey Cup. And how do you move this thing? So we had to pass it up over our heads, one guy at a time, in order to get it up the ledge and over the underpass. This always reminds me of the insanity of the sports fans, and in this case, rider fans. We would not be denied, and there was no going back. We would sit in the downpour with our Grey Cup, reveling in last year's title for at least one more game. I got another one from where is it here? Kirk Winter, and Kirk he talked about the 1989 playoff run in its entirety, and Riders had the Brian Walling draw play to beat Calgary, and then there was the miraculous, unexpected win over Edmonton, and then there was the classic Grey Cup. So I think all three games from 1989 are stories in and of themselves. So I knew 89 would come up pretty early. What are your memories of that, Tony?
I was lucky to go to the Western Final.
Oh, cool.
What an amazing game that was. You know, we were the underdogs, and for our riders, the lovable losers for all those years, to come up and just punch the Eskimos in the nose was a great feeling. What a real high. And then the Grey Cup game, well, that's probably my second favorite Grey Cup game, 2007 being my first. The 89, thinking of, that Tony Champion catch, and then how we just battled back, and with Kent in the huddle, and then Dave and Glenn Suter with that game-winning field goal. It was just an amazing feeling that those type of memories and those feelings never leave you. I'm getting goosebumps just thinking about it now. Those are special moments in sports that we've been lucky to be part of.
And it's been 30 years, and yet it is still so vivid.
Oh, you can see the timeout, and I love the story about where Dave tells Glenn, talk to me about anything but football, and whatever they talked about, it calmed Dave down, and for us it looks like a chip shot, but the pressure that he had on him, it was probably very similar to what Paul McCallum had in that game against BC, but Dave was able to make the magic.
In 2007, when you were with the Rough Riders for the Grey Cup victory, I decided to go stand on the very spot where Dave Ridgway kicked the field goal. And and Dr. Bill Elliott took my picture standing on that very spot, which was kind of cool. And I looked at the uprights, and 35 yards, Dave Ridgway could have hit the kick that left fielded blindfolded. I mean, it was Dave Ridgway with a pressure kick. It was going to happen. And but you look at the uprights from 35 yards away, and they look like a tuning fork. It's like that. That's not that easy to do. For Dave Ridgway, it's, ho hum. But add the pressure. I looked at it and just, I wonder what he was thinking when he looked at those uprights. Did he look at those uprights? That much easier kicks than that have been missed in pressure situations. And but the thing is, I've always wondered, this might be a bit of a tangent, what if he'd missed and it went for a single? Would people celebrate the single as much as the kick? Either one would have produced a Grey Cup championship. And the single was probably the easier of the two. Just hoof it.
I think as Rider fans at that time, we'd have taken anything.
Anything.
Yeah.
I remember right before earlier in the game, Dave kicked a field goal that hit one of the uprights and bounced through for 3 points. And another 3 inches, and it goes the other way. Some of the Ticats maintained that the uprights were greased. But earlier in the game, he'd hit an upright. The only thing that could have gone wrong in that field goal attempt, or that single attempt, was to hit the upright and get nothing. And I remember thinking, why don't they just blast the thing through the end zone and eliminate any risk of hitting the upright, as happened in that game?
Dave was always money, so I think the confidence was there that he was going to hit it, or at least punch it all the way through, because he had a great leg. And, I think everybody loves the idea of being a kicker because you don't have to do much at practice until that no time on the clock. Let's make that kick like the kid in Chicago.
Yeah, who wants that job at certain times? The thing is, too, they called the timeout. Now it's fashionable for teams to ice the other team's kicker. The Riders iced their own kicker. Like, nobody could really figure out why John Gregory called the timeout there.
Just to relax everybody, I guess.
And all it did was create a situation where Dave's asking Glenn Suter to say, let's basically calm me down here, put my mind in a different place, as opposed to trot onto the field. Hamilton can call a timeout if they wish, but let's just kick the thing.
I remember after the game, they were showing the highlight of the kick and asking John Gregory what was going through his mind, and they showed John jumping up and down, and he said, "Boy, did I get great vertical after the kick."
Yeah, that was, and Gary Greger right beside him. It's like, okay, who is this guy? People started asking after the Grey Cup, who is that gentleman right beside John Gregory? Actually, it could have been a 33-yard field goal. They gotten the ball down to the 26, and then they tried to position the ball where in an ideal spot for Dave Ridgway to kick it, so they moved it back 2. So they lengthened their field goal attempt by 2, and then they called a timeout. Both of them would seem to go against convention, but it worked.
That drive is something to remember. The way we marched the ball down. Kent was in total control of the field, and he was almost a calming influence. When you watched him walk to the line, and you saw his motions and his facial expressions, there was no way we were going to lose that game.
No,
Kent was, and I saw it when he was a coach in 2007. Where, I would never bet against Kent Austin. He's just got that magic with him. And you feel that presence of, I'm going to get this done and I'm going to make it work.
I just remember his presence in the field that day, even walking toward the line of scrimmage or walking toward the huddle. It was almost marching. He was so in control. And you have to remember, at that point, it wasn't a foregone conclusion that Kent Austin was the Riders' undisputed number one quarterback going into that game.
That's right.
He wasn't Kent Austin just yet. That game made him Kent Austin.
That's right. Tommy Burgess came off the bench against Edmonton and got us to the Grey Cup.
And there was even a debate going into the week who should start, because Kent had hurt a knee against Edmonton, and John Gregory decided early in the week that it was going to be Kent Austin. And it was appropriate the next year that Tom Burgess got to win a Grey Cup with Winnipeg too. That was great to see, because he always felt sort of, as much as he felt a part of the 89 team and as much as he celebrated, he wasn't the guy in the Grey Cup game. The next year he got to be the guy, and he was the offensive MVP in 1990 with Winnipeg. So I'm glad he got that moment, because he was a terrific person.
He was a great
terrific person.
When I got a chance to work with him when he came back, And you're right, first-class guy. He really cared about his teammates, and he put in a lot of effort. So it was good to see him have some success.
I would be remiss if I didn't ask you about 2007. You saw that with a clarity and with a proximity that most people can only dream of. What are your recollections when you think of, I guess, not only that game, which wasn't really that good, but that season, which was magical?
It was a great game. As I look back on it now, it was a great game. I remember a couple of things. The one, when Andy Fantu scored the first touchdown, he had the ball in his hand like a loaf of bread.
Dangling it around.
Put that damn thing away.
I know.
It was funny because I think everybody had the same thought. Put that ball away. But he had such big hands that it was wrapped around. And the other thing was... the presence. I was standing on the sidelines, and to watch Kent again being in control and being able to keep Carey in control as well, and they did enough to win. And I guess my contribution to that win was I was the person that got to hand the lineup into to the CFL officials, something that Eric Tillman and I went over for about 2 hours to make sure that everything was correct. And, it was a piece of history for a Saskatchewan kid to grow up and be part of a championship with the Saskatchewan-Roughriders. It was really an honorable moment for me.
And as we've seen, the importance of handing in the roster is not to be discounted. It cost the Roughriders a player last year when they were in Edmonton because they handed in an incorrect roster.
And earlier, a couple of years earlier, BC had... left Paul McCallum off the roster, and he wasn't able to play in the game. So absolutely, that going through to make sure the import, non-import starters, numbers, and names are correct is it's a very important job.
No doubt. I mean, you're a testament to the excellence that can be demonstrated in such situations.
Yeah, I'm going to take credit for the game.
Hey, people would certainly remember your name if you'd handed in the incorrect roster.
It's like being an offensive lineman. Nobody knows who you are until you get caught for holding on and they have to bring the touchdown back.
What do you mean Kerry Joseph isn't playing today? Yeah. Kerry gets a bit of a bad rap for that game. People say they won. I've heard it said that the Riders won the Grey Cup in spite of Kerry Joseph that day. He threw the touchdown pass to Andy Fantus at a crucial juncture. He rushed for more than 100 yards that day. People kind of forget that, okay, the passing wasn't the greatest. He was 13 for 34 with an interception and a touchdown, but 100 plus yards rushing, that's pretty huge. And the guts that Wes Cates showed as well, playing with a broken foot.
Wes Cates is one of my all-time favorite players. What people don't realize about Wes Cates is his skill set as a blocker. He made so many plays as blocking that allowed Kerry to get the job done. And, during the Grey Cup game, I think Kerry did exactly what he needed to do to win, using his legs a little bit, getting some things done with his feet. But Winnipeg was a good team. They had a very strong defense, and they schemed well against us.
I've heard it said, too, that Winnipeg wins that game if they had Kevin Glenn. It's a hypothetical. You never know. I've said in rebuttal to that, okay, Winnipeg didn't have Kevin Glenn, but the Riders didn't have Matt Dominguez, who was leading the league in receiving yards at the time he was injured in Winnipeg in the Banjo Bowl. And so his stats at that point were better than Milt Stegall. So if you take Milt Stegall out of the Bombers lineup, it's the equivalent of the Riders losing Matt Dominguez for the Grey Cup. They ended up starting Michael Palmer, Corey Grant, and Yo Murphy in the receiving corps that day, along with DJ Flick and Andy Fantu. So that's not a great receiving corps. It would have been if they'd had Matt Dominguez. So yeah, the Bombers didn't have Kevin Glenn. Riders didn't have their best receiver.
Yeah, and that makes a big difference, as you know, because you're able to take away those two key receivers with Flick and Fantus. I think that's what made Getzlaf such a priority with the Saskatchewan Roughriders, that he was a really good go-to third guy.
Yeah.
And he, you could double up the first two guys, but then Chris had the ability to get open all the time, and that's what made him such a success.
I used to watch Chris Getzlaf. It's easy to watch the ball. I used to watch Chris Getzlaf run patterns. I loved watching his pass patterns. He was such a perfect route runner. He could do so much even with a wink or a nod or even a head fake. He ran just absolutely amazing patterns, especially that corner pattern. I used to just take time out of games, and if it was a passing situation, I'd just watch Chris Getzlaf. I might end up missing the whole play if they went to Dressler or Fantouz or somebody, but I was always a fan of watching Chris Getzlaf run pass patterns. I thought it was absolutely artful.
He was very dedicated to the game. He was a professional on and off the field. And his draft year, the Regina Ram coaches, to their credit, said that Chris Getzlaf is the best receiver in the draft. Somebody needs to take him. He may not be ready today, but because of his work ethic and his abilities, he's going to be a CFL All-Star. And they were absolutely right. The trade to bring Chris Getzlaf from Hamilton to Regina, that trade would not have happened if Getzlaf was not part of the deal. That was the Corey Holmes for Jason Armstead. And it was funny. That's you talk about memories. That was one of my memories. Eric and I went to the airport to greet the players because we thought Corey needed a ride to the Luther College where he was going to stay. Little did we know the fanfare. I don't know if you were at the airport. I was there that night. And there was so many people there. They had their Corey Holmes dusted off jerseys. They had signage, and they were all there for him. And over on the other side, Chris's family was waiting for him. So it was kind of cool that we had the two components that were going to bring us championships.
I remember Chris coming down the stairs, and I interviewed him that night, and it was like there was really no competition for his time at that point other than immediate family. And I remember Eric Tillman saying at the time of the trade, there's a lot of talk about Corey Holmes, there's a lot of talk about Jason Armstead, but the key to this deal is going to be Chris Getzlaf. And I remember a Rams coach telling me just after the CFL draft that year, I think it was the one in which Chris Bauman went, number one. Chris Bauman from the U of R Rams. And one of the Rams coaches said, Chris Bauman isn't even the best receiver on the Rams. It's Chris Getzlaf.
Yeah, and
didn't that prove to be true?
Very, very true. And he was sure-handed. You could go to him in clutch situations. The quarterbacks loved him because they knew that if the ball was going to him, he was going to catch the ball. And he had a deceptive speed and quickness where he could get away from somebody and take it to the house. And we saw that on many occasions.
So your favorite Rider game be the 2007 Grey Cup?
It is. The second one would be the 2007 Labor Day Classic where Kerry Joseph did the draw play at Sam. Getting some emotion in my voice. That was an amazing game.
What stands out?
People staying in the stands believing that we were going to win. Kent had installed a belief in our locker room that no matter what the situation was, we were going to win the game. And that started to filter out to the fan base. That, Roy had put together a really solid base for our team, and Eric came in and closed it out. Yeah. And with Kent Austin, I think that was the difference. Kent was a winner. And he had a certain belief that, hey, you know what? You can't beat me.
Yeah.
And he installed that in our team in 2007, and that was the piece that tipped it over. And to this day, I'm forever grateful to Kent for bringing home a championship that I could be part of.
And Roy Shivers deserves huge credit. As you mentioned, he set the table for that team, but he made one trade in 2006 in which the Rough Riders acquired quarterbacks who collectively took the Rough Riders to 4 Grey Cup wins. Yeah. Four Grey Cup games and 2 wins. Kerry Joseph in the dispersal, number 1 pick in the Ottawa dispersal draft, and as sort of a throw-in that deal, somebody named Darian Durant.
Yeah, you know what? That's a great story because at that time, Darian Durant's agent was a friend of Roy Shivers. And he said, hey, you got to get my kid over there. You got to get my kid over there. So Roy worked that deal.
Wow.
He trusted his friend to say, hey, this kid's got a ton of talent. He just needs some time to develop. You need to bring him over. And you're absolutely right. I don't think Roy gets enough credit for the pieces that brought 2 championships and a lot of winning seasons and really set the organization apart from other teams in the CFL. As you know, Darian's had a wonderful career in Saskatchewan, and he did a lot of great things both on and off the field. A character guy, and Roy was the person that brought that character to Saskatchewan. And you're right, he made the deals to get Armstead and Kerry Joseph. He traded some draft picks to make that deal happen with Hamilton.
But to get 2 quarterbacks in one trade That's really amazing.
Yeah, if you take a look at
that was just an absolutely crucial move.
And there's teams in all leagues that are looking to find one quarterback, let alone get two people that will help you today, yet have that confidence that Kerry Joseph had to help the young guy along, right? So they had a great relationship, and you could see that as the seasons progressed, Darian took that, hey, I'm going to help the young guys. When he was hurt, he was able to help our young guys a little bit as well.
A bit of a tangent. If teams don't fold, how many Grey Cups have the Rough Riders won? If the Montreal Alouettes don't fold right before the 1987 season, there's no Dave Ridgway returning to Saskatchewan. There's no Dan Rasevich. The Rough Riders benefited mightily from the folding of the Montreal Alouettes, and they benefited mightily from the folding of the Ottawa Renegades. So thanks to those foldings, Darian Durant, Dave Ridgway, Dan Rasevich, and Kerry Joseph.
Yeah, you speak of Dan Rasevich. Was there anybody more fearless on special teams than Dan Rasevich?
He was a super Dave Osborne of the Canadian Football League.
He wouldn't even tell you. His arm would be hanging down, and he wouldn't even tell people he was hurt. He'd be out there. He was a good community guy as well. With the Rough Riders, I did a lot of community organization, and he was one of our leading guys. And and a great teammate. People loved playing with Raz because they knew that they could count on him, and that his effort was going to be all out every time. There was no quit.
Oh, and there still isn't. Anything he does, whether it's doing things to help childhood cancer. I mean, he's just as devoted to that now as he was to playing football. I did a story on Dan a couple of years ago. I sat down with him one day and I looked at his hands, and a lot of his fingers looked like pass routes. And I said, "Can I do a story on your hands?" And we went through finger by finger. I think there's two of them that weren't. That didn't show the ravages of playing football, and he told me a story behind how each finger became, and that's the kind of devotion that Dan Rasevich played with for so long and so well.
I remember reading that story. What a great story, because it really tells you the aftermath of pro football.
Yeah.
We see our heroes on the field playing, but we don't always see the effects of what they did on the field. And if you take a look at Dan Rasevich's hands, I just had breakfast with Roy Shivers not too long ago. He just had his knee replaced from his playing days. These guys sell their bodies out to entertain us, and I give them a lot of credit because a lot of times once they've left the field, that spotlight doesn't shine on them anymore. But they remember the game because they're having trouble getting out of the chair.
Yeah, I mean, my right knee is arthritic in 3 places, and that's playing touch football. I don't know how people do that for a living. And you look at some of the surviving members of the 1966 team and the degree to which they're feeling it. Some of the 89 Rough Riders, I'm sure as they approach their 60s and 70s, are going to notice that. It's and they didn't do it for a ton of cash.
No, they did it for the love of the game. I have a bad elbow, but it's buffet related.
Yeah, that'd be the effects of buffets are not necessarily evident with my elbows, but more so with my jowls. So, my favorite Rider game was 1978 final game of the regular season, Ron Lancaster's final game. That to me was the greatest sporting event ever held. Meant nothing to the Saskatchewan Roughriders in terms of the standings. They were going to finish dead last, regardless, and meant nothing to the Edmonton Eskimos because they clinched first place in the West. But the week before against Winnipeg, Ronnie had been booed in his final appearance at Taylor Field. He threw a couple of interceptions late in the game after coming in to relieve an ineffectual Larry Dick. And Larry Dick had started the game because Ronnie had already said he was retiring and they wanted to groom his successor. So Larry Dick starts, doesn't play well against Winnipeg. Ronnie comes in, plays even worse, gets booed. It was awful. The next week, Riders are in Edmonton, and my mom and I boarded not filled to capacity Dash Tours bus to Edmonton. And Larry Dick started again. Actually played pretty well, but the fans wanted to see Ronnie. And there were signs thanking Ronnie. And in the fourth quarter, the Eskimos fans started chanting, "We want Ronnie, we want Ronnie." And there was about 30 of us in the end zone also joining in, but we were drowned out by tens of thousands of Eskimos fans who had similar sentiments. So they put Ronnie in. And Not long after that, he throws a touchdown pass to Joey Walters. Bob McAreedy's convert put the Riders ahead 27-26. Jim Germany fumbles. Riders recover. Ronnie marches him down again, completes the final pass of his career to Brian O'Hara. And then Ronnie snuck in for a touchdown that was an insurance major. And not long after that, Bill Baker sacked Warren Moon. Bill Baker also playing his final game for a safety touch. And I just thought it was just the perfect way for Ronnie to go out. Just one more comeback, one more kind of finish for which he was known. And especially when you contrast that to a week earlier at Taylor Field, which was so sad. The Riders could win 20 more Grey Cups in my lifetime. They could have 20 more games like the Labor Day game in 2007. I doubt that they will. But nothing for me will top that 1978 game at Edmonton. The Ronnie's last game to me was storybook, and it was beautiful and it was appropriate. And I still get goosebumps even thinking about it. And I was 14 years old, and I'm so glad I was there. That was just beautiful.
It's amazing that we have players like Ronnie Lancaster that have done so much for this organization, yet we have a group of fans that will boo at those situations. It's sometimes I don't think we see the big picture.
No,
because they booed him as a coach and they booed him as a player. That's why he never came back as a general manager. Larry Mueller tells the story that he wasn't going to let him boo him as a general manager as well. So some of my best memories of working with the Rough Riders over the 16 years are when Hamilton or Edmonton would come in, and Roy Shivers and Larry Mueller and Ron Lancaster and myself would be sitting in their office, and they would be trading stories back and forth. And Larry and I would be laughing so hard just because of, well, you know how they are, what great storytellers they were. I learned a lot from those two gentlemen.
Oh, can you imagine? You were the fly on the wall.
Oh,
there.
Yeah.
Ronnie had a great quote. He said, it used to be said that in Saskatchewan, the wind blows in the winter, spring, and summer, and Lancaster blows playoff games in the fall. That was Ronnie saying that. Oh, he was a funny guy. I miss Ronnie every day.
Yes. You would have had an interesting look at things with Bob Hughes, right? And Chaos by the Creek. Your mentor, he had a great way of writing about the Rider situation. And my understanding is that they were really close friends. They were
best of friends. And one time somebody asked Ronnie, Bob just ripped the Rough Riders. And somebody said to Bob, Ronnie, why do you still talk to this guy after you just finished ripping him? And Ronnie said, if I'd played better, he wouldn't have had to write anything. There were times when there was a little bit of friction over that, but nothing that was enduring. They both understood where each other was coming from. They were absolutely dear friends. And I remember Bob the day Ronnie died, and it was so. I'm not sure Bob ever got over that, and sadly we lost Bob 5 years later.
Two sports icons in Saskatchewan. The third one would be George Reed, and it is so honorable to have him back in the province and all the work he's done since he's been back. It's sad that he had left for so long. But for him to be back now and be the crown jewel of the Rough Riders, that he's such a classy man. He does so much good work for Special Olympics and other charities. It's a real honor to have gotten to know him a little bit and to have a chance to talk with him.
Oh, he's amazing. It wasn't long after Ronnie died that George moved back here. It was at the start of 2009 that George and Angie moved back here from Calgary, and George just picked up where he'd left off. At one point, he was involved with 47 different charities or community organizations.
That's amazing.
While he was playing, and on top of that, he was working extensively with the CFL Players Association. I mean, just absolutely tireless. And
I don't know if people realize what a great sense of humor he has.
No,
I was actually in a meat smoking class at Smokin' Okies. And George and Angie were taking the same class, and we had a hoot. He was a lot of fun.
Oh, it's an understated wit, but
yes.
it's there, and I just cherish every chance I get to sit down with George, and I've milked it so many times and just sat there, and it's just Queen Elizabeth could come down and sit right next to me, and I probably wouldn't be as in awe as I am every time I chat with George. And it was the same way chatting with Ronnie. I could never get past that.
His personality just enlightens a room. You know, he takes, to this day, he takes time to talk football or whatever you want with him. You know, and that's a lot of, I give him a lot of credit for that.
And he's so patient with people. And I remember on a couple of occasions he signed autographs as part of the Razor Reader Sports Memorabilia Show. And the first time I asked him if he could spare an hour to sign autographs, and he goes, no. And you talk about his wit, and he goes, no. And I'm kind of gurgling on the end of the phone. I go, George Reed said no? Like, you don't want to take it for granted, but George Reed is famous for saying yes. So anyways, I make the request, and he goes, for an hour, and he goes, no. And then there's silence, and he goes, I'll do 2 hours. And then he did 2.5. And when he walked into the room without anybody saying George is here, as soon as anybody saw him, everybody stopped and gave him a standing ovation. Who else can do that? Who else who lives in Saskatchewan right now could get a standing ovation just by walking into a room other than Tony Plater?
You.
They'll stand up to leave. It's an evacuation.
It's, you know, we've had a lot of really interesting people come through the Rough Rider organization. You know, some of my favorite coaches, my all-time favorite coaches, Ken Austin. Second is Cal Murphy. You know, I know that you had to work with Cal.
Loved it.
And Cal was always, there's a man with a great sense of humor.
Oh.
And hardworking. And, you know, we were lucky to have Cal. And some of the training camps we had a lot of fun. He's a phenomenal person, but and a good coach, but even a better person. And you know, third was Don Matthews. I only got to
what was that like?
I only got to spend 6 months with Don Matthews. I started in September, and he left at the end of the year in '93. I learned a lot from Don. Confidence, ability to, hey, we're going to win. I think he helped shape Kent Austin somewhat that same way. And you know, his ability to say, what I loved about him as a coach, things were black and white. We're going to do this, and we're not going to do this, and he never wavered. As you know, there were times where things would change during a season where a coach would say, okay, we're going to do this and not do that. My all-time favorite Don Matthews story actually included the media. He said, Tony, I need you to call a media conference at 1 o'clock and have them come to the President's Lounge, and I'll be in there. So at 12:50, I see him walking out the back door. I go, hey, Coach, we got about 10 minutes. They can wait. I'm going for a haircut.
And I never covered the Riders when Don Matthews was here. I didn't start writing about them until '96 when I really ruined your life for a few years. And I missed out on that. Daryl Davis got along tremendously with Don Matthews. And there were horror stories elsewhere about Don Matthews' dealings with the media. But there's nobody in Regina where the spotlight shines the brightest and is the most intense that I ever talked to about covering the Rough Riders when Don Matthews was here, who has anything but terrific things to say about him.
Yeah, you know, my philosophy on a football coach is that they need to come here and win. They don't need to come here and be my friend. I want them to win. Mm-hmm. And sometimes we lose that if they're not a warm, cuddly personality. And, you know, you talk about Don's relationship with Daryl. I remember Don coming in and putting one of Daryl's sons on the neg list.
Leader Post employee Austin Davis.
Yeah, exactly. He put him on the neg list the day he was born and then sent it to Daryl. That's the kind of, and he did so much work behind the scenes with Chili for Children, and you know, but he wasn't the one to say, "Hey, look at me." He was here to win football games and do his part for the community. And I always felt that Don did things for the right reasons.
Yeah,
you know, he came in and he cut Eddie Lowe, he cut Richie Hall. Well, you're not going to endear yourself to the fan base doing that, but he knew that he had to make some moves to win football games. You know, another person that came in and made some tough decisions, I thought, was Roy Shivers. He let some of the other players go, Don Narcisse, Dan Farthing, that had great careers with the Rough Riders, but he realized that you know, to reach the pinnacle that he wanted to take the team, he had to make some tough decisions as well.
And, you know, Chris Jones faced that coming in here. One of his first moves, or two of his first moves, farewell Weston Dressler, farewell John Chick. The following year, Darian Durant was traded. And for the most part, the players that were released never approached the levels at which they produced during the peak years in Saskatchewan. But there's still people who won't forgive Chris Jones for making any of those moves. And some of it was in the handling, too. There's no easy way to do it. But sometimes you just don't build yourself much of a safety net if you handle things in a way that displeases the fans. Whereas winning is the bottom line, but I think at times if you do some things to really show that you're committed to the community and that you care and that you're sincere, you can overcome a setback or two. And I point to Ken Miller. How many coaches who lost a championship game in the manner that Rough Riders lost a 2009 Grey Cup final would have even been around the next year? Can you imagine if an unpopular coach had been the losing coach in the 13th man game? Goodbye. They probably wouldn't have even let him fly back with Calgary, from Calgary with the team. But Ken Miller was such a tremendous guy and left such an impression on people that he was applauded after that. And he coached the team for another season and a half after that. That could have been a career ender for some coaches, but because people got to know Ken Miller and they knew he cared and they knew what a good man he is, that bought him, that was a huge mulligan. An unpopular coach. Can you imagine the vilification that would have taken place after the 2009 Grey Cup?
You're right. They wouldn't have let him back into the city. We'd have built a wall.
Mexico will pay for the wall.
And you're right about Ken Miller, a first-class guy. A couple of funny stories that I have about Ken was that after 2007, the Grey Cup, when we got Christmas cards made with the Grey Cup and the team picture, and I was the printer had delivered them, and so I was taking them to the coaches so that they could send them to family and friends. And I said to Ken, "Hey Ken, I got some Christmas cards here, Grey Cup with championship Christmas cards for you to send to some of your friends." And he goes, "I think I'm going to send them to some of my enemies too." And the players had such a respect for Ken and what he stood for. There was a day at practice where I remember his wife Maureen, who was the ultimate community person.
Oh, what a great person.
Fabulous lady, isn't she? And she had brought some of the disabled veterans over from Wascana Rehab to watch practice. And at the, you know how you get into the big huddle after the game, and Coach Miller said, "Gentlemen, there's some disabled veterans over there. I want some of you guys to go over and shake their hands." And what happened was, from center field on, the guys lined up in a long line, and every one of them went, out of respect for Coach Miller and for the service that these gentlemen had provided for us, went and shook their hands. It was just a heartfelt moment. I thought, wow, what respect for our coach and for the dedication that these gentlemen had put their life on the lines. There was both Canadian and American players. That didn't matter, right? This was what was most important, and I think that was the kind of respect that Ken had for the community, as well as the respect the players had for Ken.
And you know what was amazing? Or what is amazing about Ken and Maureen? It's like they grew up in Saskatchewan. They have, aside from the time that they spent here, they had no ties to this province, this community. Yet you instantly think of them as part of Saskatchewan. They're living in North Carolina now, but they got it. Yeah. They invested in it.
They made a really positive impact both on and off the field. The charity work they did, and you know how you said that George Reed never said no to an event. Ken Miller never said no to an event either. Either him or Maureen or both of them would go, and Maureen actually came back and volunteered at different events. I know. I'm a Red Cross volunteer, and Maureen showed me pictures of when she went to Texas and was volunteering during one of the disasters that happened there. Just quality people. And, I think we're really blessed to have people that can come to our community and have that kind of impact and make our lives better.
I remember Ken Miller. We're going a little long on this one, but we've only got 6 hours to go on this podcast. I remember one day, it used to work out really well where after practice, the players would do their interviews and Ken Miller would wait for the players to be done, and he would address the media. And I didn't talk to the players as much as everybody else did. As a columnist, I don't really need a ton of interviews, and I'd leave it. The beat reporter needs the interviews more than I do, so I'd do an interview or two maybe, and then Ken Miller would be sitting by himself on the bench. So I used to go over and chat with him, and generally it would crack me up. And one day he told me this story about this letter he'd received regarding Darian Durant. The letter had been mailed on a Thursday, and this fan absolutely ripped Darian Durant to pieces. Just awful, should not be playing, terrible quarterback. You name it that could be negative, he said it. So the letter was mailed on a Thursday. It arrived on a Monday. Darian Durant had thrown for like 400 yards and 3 touchdowns on a Sunday. So Ken Miller tells me about this letter that he'd received. And you could just tell he was just itching for a premise to broadcast this. So we had this little chat off the cuff, and then the scrum begins with Ken Miller, and everybody asked the question. And right at the end, I said, Darian had a tremendous game on Sunday. Do you have a kind of a feel for how the fans are responding to the way he's playing? Well, Ken Miller had one of the great spiels of all time in Rider coaching history, telling this story, and it was the easiest call of my life. And he'd sort of planted it with me before. Just a wonderful man. I still I'm lucky to be able to keep in touch with Ken and Maureen every now and then.
He's a great artist. I don't know if you follow him on Facebook, but he actually shows some of the artwork that he does. Very talented man. Yeah. Very talented.
As are you, Tony.
It was a pleasure to be here.
Is there anything else you'd like to add?
I think that this is a great way to share Rider memories because we were such a historic team. And the work that you do with this podcast is awesome to bring back those memories and keep the past alive, because I think a lot of times that we play in the moment now.
Yeah.
Right. And it's about the 2019 Rough Riders or the 2018 Rough Riders. But for them to be on the field and play, we have to go back and remember the people that helped with the telethons, the people that helped build the team up. And so I really appreciate you doing these type of things and sharing your knowledge of the organization. Well, and I'm looking forward to your new book.
Yes, comes out in September. Will be remaindered in October probably. But that's sort of 100 cool things to know about the Rough Riders, and some of the subject matter we discussed today. There's a chapter on Ken Miller and a chapter on Maureen Miller.
Oh, that's awesome.
In there, for example. So we have to read our little thing at the end. Would you like to read the thing at the end, Tony?
Sure. Please,
this is Tony Plater with the thing at the end.
The thing at the end. Please rate us on iTunes and leave a review. It helps us grow the podcast. If you'd like to send us a question, you can email Rob at rvanstone@postmedia.com. That's rvanstone@postmedia.com. And we might... What do you mean might? We might read your question on the show. I think he should read your question.
How enticing can that be for people? We might read your question. There's no might about we might have you back. We'd love to have you back. Tony, thank you so much for joining us today.
Thank you for the opportunity, and it was a real pleasure to work with you in the media box, because I always knew no matter what happened on the field, I'd leave the stadium with a smile.
Yes, we did. We had some great laughs, didn't we? As we did today. For the wonderful Tony Plater, I'm the non-wonderful Rob Vanstone, and we'll do this again next week. Thank you so much for joining us.